Commander Minjun Park stood before the massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers. The metal gleamed under artificial stars that dotted the ceiling of Nexus Prime Station. His hands felt slightly damp, and his heart beat faster than normal. He knew what waited inside. 57 alien species would judge whether humanity deserved a place among the stars. The doors opened with a soft hiss. Minjun walked into a vast circular room filled with beings that looked like living nightmares and impossible dreams. Some had scales that caught the light, like emeralds. Others floated in transparent spheres filled with glowing gas. A few looked almost human, until you noticed their eyes had too many pupils, or their fingers bent in ways that made his stomach twist. High Arbiter Zethkala sat on the central platform. The Saurian leader stood 8 feet tall with dark green scales and golden eyes that never blinked. His voice carried no emotion when he spoke. Human Commander Park, your species seeks full membership in our council. We must first understand why you believe fear-driven creatures deserve such an honor. Minjun felt his throat tighten. The question hit exactly where it was meant to hurt. Every species here had evolved past fear. They saw it as a weakness that smart beings should eliminate. With respect, High Arbiter. We prefer to think of ourselves as cautious, rather than fear-driven. A sound like grinding metal came from the insectoid Kithara representative. Minjun realized it was laughter. Council member Vextar spoke through clicking mandibles that somehow produced perfect words. Caution, fear. The same primitive response wearing different clothes. We, Kythera, removed such obstacles to clear thinking 3 million years ago. Our hive mind operates with perfect efficiency because we eliminated the chaos of individual terror. Diplomatic attaché Hyejin Kim sat quietly in the observation area. She watched the aliens with careful eyes and took notes on a small device. Her presence calmed Minjun slightly, but he could see the concern on her face. High Arbiter Zethkala gestured with one clawed hand. Let me share our understanding of fear, Commander Park. Fear clouds judgment. It makes beings run when they should fight, freeze when they should act, and waste energy on imaginary dangers. Every species in this council has transcended such limitations. The room filled with murmurs of agreement. A floating Veilnari spoke with a voice like wind chimes. My people achieved mental discipline that eliminated fear 800,000 years ago. We can face any threat with perfect calm because we know panic serves no purpose. The Saurians, Zethkala continued, modified our genetics to remove the fear response entirely. Our warriors are unstoppable because they cannot retreat. They know no hesitation in the face of any enemy. Minjun listened to species after species describe how they had eliminated fear. Some used technology to edit their brains. Others evolved past it naturally. A few practiced meditation techniques that lasted centuries to achieve perfect mental control. They all spoke with pride about leaving fear behind, like an old skin they no longer needed. You see our concern, Zethkala said. How can we trust important decisions to beings who might panic? How can we rely on allies who jump at shadows? Fear makes creatures unpredictable and weak. The words stung because Minjun knew they contained some truth. Humans did get scared. They worried about things that might never happen. They sometimes made bad choices when frightened. But something about the alien's certainty bothered him in ways he could not yet explain. High Arbiter, may I ask a question? Speak. When you eliminated fear, what happened to your survival instincts? How do you recognize genuine danger? Zethkala's golden eyes narrowed slightly. We use logic and calculation. We assess threats rationally without emotional interference. Fear was simply evolution's crude early warning system. We have much better methods now. I see. Minjun paused, choosing his words carefully. And these better methods have served you well? Obviously, we have survived and thrived across the galaxy for millions of years. Heijin looked up from her notes. She had been studying each species' history since their arrival. The official records showed impressive achievements, but something felt incomplete about the stories. Too many gaps existed in their historical data. Too many missing colonies and lost expeditions that the records barely mentioned. Council member Vextar clicked his mandibles impatiently. Enough talk about our methods, human. We must evaluate yours. We have prepared a practical test that will determine your species' worthiness. What kind of test? Minjun asked. A crisis situation requiring immediate resolution. A mining colony has gone silent. Our best experts cannot determine the cause. Standard protocols have failed. If your fear-based thinking can succeed where our superior methods have not, perhaps there is some small value to your emotional chaos. High Arbiter Zethkala leaned forward. You will take a small team to investigate. If you solve the crisis without succumbing to panic, we will reconsider your application. If fear overwhelms you as we expect, humanity will withdraw its petition for 50 years. The room fell silent. Minjun felt sweat on his palms and a tight knot in his stomach. 57 alien species watched him with expressions ranging from mild curiosity to obvious contempt. They expected him to refuse or demand easier terms. They wanted to see fear control his decisions. We accept your test, he said quietly. Heijin's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. They both knew this was likely their only chance. Excellent. Zethkala's voice carried satisfaction. Transport will be provided immediately. The colony is designated Mining Station Kepler 442C. 50,000 beings from various council species work there, or worked there, since communications ended 4 days ago. Any other information about what we might face? None. That is the nature of the test. You will discover the situation as our experts did, and hopefully prove more capable of resolution. Minjun bowed formally. Thank you for this opportunity, High Arbiter. As he turned to leave, Heijin fell into step beside him. Neither spoke until the chamber doors closed behind them. That felt like a trap, she whispered. Maybe. But it's also a chance to prove something important. What's that? Minjun looked back at the sealed doors. That there might be wisdom in being afraid of the right things. They walked toward the transport docks while alien eyes tracked their movement through security monitors. In the council chamber, quiet conversations began about how quickly the humans would break under pressure. None of them considered that fear might be exactly what the situation required. The transport ship dropped out of hyperspace near Kepler 442C with a shudder that made Minjun's teeth ache. Through the viewport, the mining colony looked wrong. The massive orbital platforms should have been blazing with lights and crawling with cargo ships. Instead, they hung in space like dead metal bones. No response to our signals, reported Captain Jiwoo Kang from the pilot's seat. The security chief had volunteered for the mission despite having 3 young children waiting at home. Minjun could see the worry in her eyes, but her hands remained steady on the controls. Chief Engineer So-Young Lee peered at her instruments with growing confusion. Power signatures are all wrong. The main reactor is running at full capacity, but most systems show as offline. It's like the energy is being drained into something that shouldn't exist. Dr. Taeho Choi floated in zero gravity near the medical scanners, his face pale with concern. Life signs are strange. I'm reading about 12,000 beings still alive, but their neural patterns look disturbed. Terrified. The other 38,000 don't register at all. Heijin finished reviewing the colony files on her tablet. According to records, 3 separate council response teams have attempted investigation. First team was Saurian military. Second was Kythera technical specialists. Third was a mixed group of Veil Nari and other species. What happened to them? Minjun asked, though his growing unease suggested he might not want to know the answer. Missing. All of them. The only communication received was a single message from the Saurian team leader. engaging unknown hostiles with standard protocols. Then, nothing. Only communication. Engaging. Captain Kang guided their ship toward the main docking bay. The massive doors stood open like a mouth waiting to swallow them. Warning lights should have been flashing to guide incoming vessels, but only darkness greeted their approach. "I don't like this," So Young muttered, checking her equipment for the 5th time. Her hands shook slightly as she calibrated the scanning devices. "Something about this whole situation makes my skin crawl." "Good," Minjun said quietly. "Stay scared. It might keep us alive." The comment would have seemed insane to any council species, but the human team understood. Fear meant their senses were sharp and their minds were preparing for danger. It meant they would be careful, instead of confident. They docked without incident. But the silence felt heavy and wrong. No workers came to greet them. No announcements echoed through the corridors. Even the background hum of life support systems sounded muted and strange. The airlock opened into a corridor that should have been busy with shift changes and cargo movement. Instead, they found empty halls lined with abandoned equipment. Personal items lay scattered on the floor as if people had dropped them while running. "Stay together," Minjun ordered, though part of him wanted to split up to cover more ground. Fear whispered that separating would be a fatal mistake, and he listened to that whisper. Dr. Choi activated his medical scanner and immediately jerked back as if stung. "There's something here that doesn't show up on instruments, but it's affecting neural activity in a 12-kilometer radius. Whatever it is, thinking about it too hard seems to make the effect stronger." "What kind of effect?" Hee-jin asked, while documenting everything with her recording equipment. "Hard to explain. Like trying to look at something that exists in too many dimensions. Your brain starts hurting if you focus on it directly." They made their way deeper into the colony, following emergency lighting that flickered in patterns that seemed almost like code. So Young noticed it first. "The lights aren't random," she said, stopping to study the sequence. "There's a pattern, but not one I recognize. It's like someone or something is trying to communicate, but using a language that makes no sense." Captain Kang kept watch behind them while the others worked. Her military training screamed warnings with every step they took. The corridors felt wrong in ways that had nothing to do with the abandoned equipment or scattered belongings. The very geometry seemed off, as if corners bent in directions that shouldn't exist. They found the first survivors huddled in a reinforced storage room near the colony's center. 12 beings from various species pressed themselves against the back wall, their eyes wide with terror that seemed beyond rational fear. A human administrator named Kyungmin Seo spoke in whispers that barely carried across the small space. "You shouldn't have come here. It feeds on minds that try to understand it." The council teams were so confident, so sure they could solve any problem with logic and superior thinking. "What happened to them?" Minjun asked, crouching down to Seo's level, to appear less threatening. They studied it, tried to categorize it, attempted direct communication. The Saurians charged at it with weapons because they knew no fear. The Kythera linked their minds to process it better. The Veil Nari meditated on its nature to achieve perfect understanding. And it consumed them. Not their bodies, their consciousness, their certainty. It grew stronger with each mind that tried to dominate or fully comprehend it. Dr. Choi recorded everything while fighting the urge to take detailed scans of the survivors. Something about their description made him want to approach the phenomenon scientifically, but a deeper instinct warned him that scientific curiosity might be exactly what the entity wanted. "How have you survived?" Hee-jin asked gently. Kyungmin Seo's laugh held no humor. "By staying terrified. By never pretending we understand what we're dealing with. By accepting that some things are too big and too dangerous for beings like us to safely examine." So Young nodded slowly. Her engineer's mind wanted to analyze power flows and energy signatures, but her human fear kept reminding her that some problems couldn't be solved with better technology or smarter thinking. "Where is it now?" Captain Kang asked. Everywhere and nowhere. It exists partially outside normal space. You can't see it directly, but you can feel it watching, waiting. It seems to target confidence and certainty above all else. As if summoned by their conversation, shadows in the corridor outside began moving in ways that violated basic physics. The walls seemed to breathe, and distant sounds echoed that might have been screaming or might have been music from dimensions humans had no words to describe. Minjun felt his heart rate spike and sweat break out across his forehead. Every instinct told him to run, but fear also whispered important information. This thing was beyond their ability to fight or fully understand. Fear was not making him weak. It was making him smart enough to stay alive. We need to get everyone to safety, he said quietly. The evacuation ships won't work, CO replied. It affects technology too. But there might be another way. The entity seems less interested in minds that acknowledge their own limitations. The human team looked at each other with growing understanding. They were afraid, genuinely terrified, but that terror was teaching them something the fearless council species had been unable to learn. Some threats required humility instead of confidence. Some problems needed wisdom instead of courage. And sometimes, being afraid was the smartest thing a thinking being could do. Dr. Taeho Choi set up his equipment in a storage room 3 levels away from the main infestation zone. His hands shook as he calibrated the sensors, and sweat dripped from his forehead despite the cool air. The fear felt like electricity running through his nervous system. But it also sharpened his thinking in unexpected ways. I'm terrified of this thing, he admitted to Heijin, who was documenting survivor interviews. But that terror is teaching me things that confident analysis never could. Not. What do you mean? Every time I start feeling sure about something, every time I think I understand a pattern, my fear warns me to step back. The entity seems to target that moment of understanding, that flash of intellectual confidence. So Young Lee worked nearby, trying to map the colony's power grid without actually understanding why it was behaving so strangely. Her engineering training wanted to solve the puzzle, but her human fear kept interrupting with warnings that some puzzles were traps. Look at this, she said, showing them a tablet full of energy readings. The power flows make no sense according to everything I know about physics. My first instinct is to figure out the principles behind it. But, Minjun prompted, but I'm scared that figuring it out might be exactly what killed the Cathera team. They were expert analysts. They probably mapped every detail before the entity consumed their collective consciousness. Through the colony's communication system, they could hear survivor reports from other safe zones. Beings who had worked alongside the missing council teams described the same pattern over and over. The Saurian warriors had shown no hesitation charging into combat with an unknown enemy. Their fearlessness had been their defining strength for millions of years. It had also been their doom. The Saurian team leader's final message was, engaging with standard protocols. Heijin read from her notes. No fear, no doubt, no second thoughts about fighting something they didn't understand. Captain Jiwoo Kang monitored the corridors through security feeds while fighting every instinct that told her to establish a perimeter and take control of the situation. Military training demanded action, but human wisdom whispered that some situations required patience and humility instead of decisive leadership. I keep wanting to secure the area, she admitted. Set up defensive positions, establish communication networks, impose order on the chaos. But something about this entity makes me think that confidence would be fatal. Doctor, Choi nodded while reviewing medical data from the surviving colonists. The Veil Nari team tried to achieve perfect mental discipline when confronting the entity. They meditated on its nature, seeking to understand it through pure mental focus. That focus made them easy targets. Because understanding it fully is impossible? So Young asked. No. Because trying to understand it fully is the trap. The entity feeds on certainty, on minds that believe they can categorize and control everything they encounter. Kyungmin Seo joined their discussion, moving carefully through corridors that seemed to shift when no one was looking directly at them. The colony administrator had survived 4 days by maintaining a state of respectful terror. "I've been thinking about the power signatures," Seo said. "Not trying to understand them, just observing. The entity draws energy whenever someone approaches it with confidence or analytical certainty. But when people stay afraid and humble, the energy drain decreases." "Oh. Fear as protection?" Heejin asked. "Fear as wisdom. Fear that teaches us our limitations. The council species eliminated the part of their minds that says, 'Maybe I shouldn't try to dominate this unknown force.'" Minjun studied the security feeds, watching shadows move in ways that hurt to observe directly. His heart pounded, and his mouth felt dry. But the terror was providing crucial information. Every time he started to feel confident about their situation, fear reminded him that they were dealing with something far beyond human understanding. "We need to evacuate the survivors," he said finally. "But not by solving the entity problem. By accepting that we can't solve it." Dr. Choi looked up from his readings. "The medical data supports that approach. Survivors show the highest mental stability when they maintain appropriate fear responses. The moment someone starts feeling confident or analytical, their neural patterns become vulnerable." "How do we evacuate people while staying terrified?" Captain Kang asked. "Very carefully," So Young replied, checking her equipment with trembling hands. "We assume everything could go wrong. We plan for complete failure. We stay humble about our chances of success." The approach went against everything their training had taught them. Human military doctrine emphasized confidence and decisive action. Human engineering relied on understanding and controlling systems. Human medicine demanded analytical thinking and logical problem-solving. But human wisdom recognized that some situations required different approaches. Fear had evolved for good reasons. Terror could provide information that confidence might miss. "The entity exists partially outside normal space-time," Dr. Choi explained as he gathered his equipment. "Trying to map its full nature is like a 2-dimensional being attempting to understand a 3-dimensional object. The effort itself creates vulnerabilities that the entity exploits." "So, we stay 2-dimensional in our thinking?" Heijin asked. "We stay humble. We acknowledge our limitations. We accept that there are things in the universe too big for any one species to safely comprehend." They began organizing the evacuation by doing everything wrong according to standard procedures. Instead of establishing command structures, they asked survivors what they thought might work. Instead of imposing plans, they admitted uncertainty about every decision. Instead of projecting confidence, they shared their genuine terror with everyone who would listen. And somehow, it began working. The entity's influence seemed to decrease when faced with minds that didn't try to understand or control it. Colonists who embraced their fear found they could move through affected areas more safely than those who attempted to remain calm and rational. "It's like the thing gets hungry when it encounters certainty," Seo observed as they guided survivors toward the docking bays. "But minds full of appropriate fear and humility don't trigger its feeding response." Captain Kang coordinated the movement of refugee groups while maintaining a constant state of worry about everything that could go wrong. Her military instincts screamed that this was no way to run an operation, but the results suggested otherwise. "I've never felt this scared during a mission," she admitted to Minjun. "I'm terrified we'll fail, terrified we'll lose people, terrified we're making the wrong choices." "Good," Minjun replied, helping an injured Saurian colonist who seemed confused by the human's fearful but effective assistance. "Stay scared. It's keeping everyone alive." As they worked, the entity's presence seemed to shift and flow around them like a tide that couldn't quite touch minds, protected by appropriate humility. The humans had found something the fearless council species had lost: the wisdom to be afraid of things that should be feared. And that wisdom was becoming their salvation. Admiral Jung Ho Bei received Minjun's emergency transmission, while his fleet was conducting routine patrol exercises 3 star systems away. The message contained no technical details about the threat, no requests for specific equipment, and no confident assertions about what they were facing. Instead, it was a simple plea for help that began with the words, "We are terrified and out of our depth. Prep the ships for immediate departure," Admiral Bay ordered his staff, "and set all defensive protocols to maximum paranoia. If our people are scared enough to admit it openly, we're dealing with something that normal procedures can't handle." The human fleet arrived at Kepler 442c 12 hours later, maintaining distances that would have seemed cowardly to any Council military force. Instead of deploying in standard formations, they spread out in random patterns that made no tactical sense, but kept them from presenting obvious targets to an unknown threat. "Sir," reported Fleet Navigator Sang-wook, from the lead ship's bridge, "the colony's energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. Attempting to analyze them gives me a headache and makes me feel like something is watching me think." "Then stop analyzing," Admiral Bay replied calmly. "Observe without understanding. Record without interpreting. Stay afraid of what we're seeing." On the colony, Min-jun's team had established evacuation protocols that violated every standard emergency procedure. Instead of organizing refugees into efficient groups, they allowed people to cluster with whoever made them feel safer. Instead of following optimal routes, they took paths that felt less threatening to terrified minds. The approach seemed chaotic to outside observers, but it worked. Colonists who stayed appropriately frightened could navigate areas where confident rescue teams had disappeared. Fear was teaching them which corridors to avoid, which sounds to ignore, and which shadows might be more than optical illusions. Council observer Thisisara watched the human evacuation efforts through remote monitoring systems. The Vale Nari representative had spent 800,000 years perfecting mental discipline that eliminated fear from her species' consciousness. Now she was beginning to suspect that perfection had cost them something vital. "Their methods make no sense," she transmitted to the other council members. "They admit uncertainty about everything. They plan for failure. They treat fear as guidance, rather than weakness." "Primitive emotional responses," replied High Arbiter Zeth Kala from Nexus Prime. "They will fail when the situation requires decisive action." But the situation was requiring something else entirely. Dr. Choi discovered the pattern while treating survivors who had been exposed to the entity's influence for extended periods. Those who maintained healthy terror showed few lasting effects. Those who had tried to overcome their fear through mental discipline or technological assistance were suffering neural damage that seemed to worsen over time. "The entity doesn't just feed on confidence," he reported to the evacuation team. "It specifically targets minds that try to transcend their natural fear responses. The Council species' greatest achievements are what made them vulnerable." Hai-Jin documented everything while fighting her own growing understanding of what this meant for galactic civilization. The implications were staggering, but every time she started to feel confident about her conclusions, fear warned her that certainty itself might be dangerous. "We need to evacuate the survivors without figuring out what the entity actually is," she said during a brief planning session. "Any attempt to fully understand it creates the vulnerability it exploits." So Young Lee had been analyzing the colony's technical systems while maintaining a careful balance between competence and humility. Her engineering expertise wanted to restore full power and communication, but her fear kept reminding her that some problems couldn't be fixed through better technology. "The previous repair teams tried to override the power anomalies," she reported. "Standard Council approach. Identify the problem, develop a solution, implement with confidence." That confidence seems to have triggered massive energy drains that consumed entire technical crews. "What about a different approach?" Captain Kang asked. "Work around the anomalies instead of trying to fix them. Accept that some systems will behave in ways we can't explain. Stay scared of the technology instead of trusting it completely." The human approach gradually revealed the true scope of what the Council species had lost. Survivor interviews painted a picture of response teams that had approached the crisis with the kind of confidence that their civilizations had spent millions of years cultivating. Saurian military units had charged into battle without hesitation because they had genetically eliminated the capacity for retreat. Their fearlessness had been bred into them through countless generations of genetic modification, aimed at creating perfect warriors who knew no doubt. Kythera technical specialists had linked their minds into collective problem-solving networks because their hive mind evolution had eliminated individual fear that might interfere with group efficiency. Their unified consciousness had made them powerful, but also vulnerable to threats that targeted mental certainty. Veil-Nari philosophers had meditated on the entity's nature because their transcendent mental discipline taught them that any phenomenon could be understood through proper application of focused thought. Their 800 millennia of achieved mental purity had left them unable to recognize when understanding itself was the danger. Each species eliminated fear for good reasons, Min Jun observed while helping coordinate the evacuation of the colony's final sectors. But they also eliminated the wisdom that fear provides. The recognition of limits. The humility to acknowledge that some things are too big for any individual mind to safely process. Admiral Bay's fleet worked to establish safe evacuation routes while maintaining constant uncertainty about their procedures. Ships that would normally operate with precision timing instead used loose coordination that could adapt when normal plans failed. This goes against everything we learned about military efficiency, Fleet Navigator O admitted while plotting course corrections based on intuitive dread rather than calculated optimization. Good, Admiral Bay replied. Military efficiency assumes you understand what you're fighting. We don't. We can't. And trying to understand might get us all killed. The final evacuation succeeded not through superior tactics or advanced technology, but through the application of appropriate terror. Humans who stayed frightened could guide alien refugees to safety. Ships that maintained paranoid distances could provide transport without triggering the entity's feeding response. As the last survivors were brought aboard the evacuation vessels, Dr. Choi compiled his medical findings into a report that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. The entity appears to be a kind of cosmic immune response, he concluded. It targets minds that develop too much confidence in their ability to understand and control the universe. Fear acts as a natural protection, because fearful minds remain humble enough to avoid triggering its attention. What does this mean for the council species? Heejin asked. It means they may have evolved themselves into a trap. Their greatest strengths became fatal weaknesses when they encountered something that required humility instead of confidence. The implications were staggering. Millions of years of evolution and social development had been aimed at eliminating what might be essential survival traits. The primitive capacity for fear that the council species had transcended might be the only thing protecting any species from cosmic-level threats that punished overconfidence. As the human fleet withdrew from Kepler 442c, they left behind a contained entity and a galaxy that would never look at fear the same way again. The Galactic Council chambers had never hosted a session like this one. Representatives from 57 species gathered not to judge humanity's worthiness, but to grapple with revelations that challenged everything they believed about advanced consciousness and cosmic survival. Elder statesman Insu Huang stood before the assembled beings with the quiet dignity that came from 60 years of diplomatic service. His hair had gone completely white since the Kepler 442c incident, and lines of worry etched his face. But his eyes held the calm wisdom of someone who had learned to embrace uncertainty rather than fight it. Honored council members, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. We gather today to discuss something that cannot be fully understood, should not be completely analyzed, and must be approached with the humility our species has always maintained through fear. High Arbiter Zethkala shifted uncomfortably on his platform. The Saurian leader's golden eyes showed confusion that would have been impossible for his species to experience before the crisis. Elder Huang, your species saved 12,000 lives and contained a threat that consumed our finest military and technical experts. Yet, You speak as if fear is somehow responsible for this success. Because it was, High Arbiter. Fear taught us what confidence could not. That some threats require wisdom rather than courage, humility rather than strength, and acceptance rather than domination. Council observer Thesisara floated in her meditation sphere, but the perfect mental discipline her species had achieved over 800 millennia now felt like a prison rather than an accomplishment. Our people eliminated fear because it seemed to serve no purpose in an ordered, logical universe. How could we have known it was essential protection against cosmic-level phenomena? Dr. Taeho Choi stepped forward to present his medical findings. The young doctor still looked shaken by his experiences, but his research had potentially saved galactic civilization from future threats they couldn't yet imagine. The entity at Kepler 442c appears to be one of several cosmic phenomena that specifically target mental overconfidence. He explained. Fear responses evolved not just to handle immediate physical dangers, but to protect consciousness itself from attempting to comprehend incomprehensible realities. Are you suggesting, clicked Council member Vextar through his mandibles, that our species' greatest achievements have made us vulnerable to cosmic forces we never suspected existed? Not vulnerable, Insu replied gently. Defenseless. The entity didn't attack your rescue teams. It simply fed on their certainty. Their confidence in their ability to understand and control any situation became the very mechanism of their consumption. Young council member Rixeth spoke from the Kythera section, his individual voice trembling with what his species had once considered a genetic defect. The capacity for doubt. I retained some fear responses due to incomplete hive mind integration. My people considered this a flaw that prevented perfect collective efficiency. And now? Prompted Haejin Kim, who was documenting the historic proceedings. Now I realize this flaw might be the only reason I'm still capable of individual thought. The entity consumed my hive mind colleagues because their certainty created a perfect feeding mechanism. The implications rippled through the chamber as species after species began to understand what they had lost in their pursuit of fearless perfection. Millions of years of evolution, genetic modification, and social conditioning had been aimed at eliminating what might be essential survival traits. Admiral Jung Ho Bei presented the tactical analysis that had changed human understanding of courage itself. Our military training had to be completely reconsidered after Kepler 442c. True courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the ability to act appropriately despite fear. Fear provides crucial intelligence about limitations, risks, and the vast unknown that surrounds all conscious life. But surely, High Arbiter, Zethkala protested, there must be scientific methods to study such entities safely? Technical protocols that could allow careful analysis without triggering their feeding response? So Young Lee answered while fighting the engineer's urge to provide confident solutions. Every protocol we developed started with the assumption that we might be wrong about everything. We studied the entity's effects without trying to understand the entity itself. We worked around its influence, instead of trying to overcome it. That approach seems chaotic, observed a floating ethereal from the luminous collective. It is chaotic, Minjun agreed. But chaos, informed by appropriate fear, is safer than order based on overconfidence. Fear teaches humility, and humility teaches survival, wisdom that fearless beings cannot access. The debate continued for hours as council species struggled to understand how their greatest achievements had become their greatest vulnerabilities. The Saurians' elimination of retreat instincts had made them unstoppable warriors, but also made them incapable of recognizing when tactical withdrawal was necessary. The Kythera's hive mind efficiency had eliminated the individual doubt that might have saved them from collective consumption. The Veil Nari's transcendent mental discipline had made them unable to recognize when understanding itself was dangerous. What you're describing, Thisara said finally, suggests that conscious evolution has limits we never suspected, that there are cosmic phenomena which punish mental advancement itself. Not advancement, Insu corrected gently. overconfidence in advancement. The universe appears to contain threats that specifically target minds which believe they have transcended all limitations. Then what do you propose? That we attempt to restore fear responses our species eliminated millions of years ago? For some species, that might be possible with careful genetic therapy and psychological conditioning. For others, it might be too late for complete restoration. But even acknowledging the value of fear-based wisdom is a crucial first step. Young Rixeth spoke up again, his voice stronger now. I volunteer to work with human researchers on protocols that might help other Kithara develop individual doubt and healthy fear responses. If we can learn to be appropriately uncertain, we might be able to survive future cosmic-level threats. The offer sparked discussions throughout the chamber as representatives considered whether their species could or should attempt to restore the emotional capacities they had spent eons eliminating. High Arbiter Zethkala rose from his platform with visible effort. The proud Saurian leader looked older than he had at the session's beginning. The council must vote on humanity's membership application. But first, I believe we need to discuss a different proposition. Which is, Minjun asked, whether humanity would accept a special advisory role in cosmic threat assessment. Your species' retained fear responses may be the galaxy's best defense against phenomena like the entity at Kepler 442c. The chamber fell silent as 57 species waited for the human response. They were offering not just membership, but a position of unique responsibility based on what they had always considered humanity's greatest weakness. Insu Huang looked at his fellow humans, seeing the fear in their eyes as they contemplated the enormous responsibility being offered. That fear was teaching them to be cautious about accepting too much power, to doubt their own capabilities, and to remain humble about their understanding of cosmic forces. We accept, he said quietly, with appropriate terror at the magnitude of what we're being asked to do. The vote was unanimous. Humanity joined the Galactic Council, not despite their fear, but because of it. They brought with them the gift of cosmic humility, the wisdom to be afraid of things that should be feared, and the courage to act despite that fear. As the session ended, representatives from dozens of species approached the human delegation with requests for cultural exchange programs, psychological consultation, and guidance on redeveloping healthy fear responses. The galaxy was beginning to understand that consciousness without fear might be consciousness without wisdom. And in a universe full of incomprehensible wonders and cosmic horrors, wisdom might be the most precious resource any species could possess. Min Jun walked home through the corridors of Nexus Prime, still feeling the weight of fear that had guided them through their greatest triumph. He hoped humanity would never lose that weight. It might be the only thing keeping them sane in an insane universe.